It started like a dream and ended like a nightmare. Caitlin Clark, the most electrifying name in women's basketball, opened her sophomore season with a triple-double that had fans buzzing about an MVP run. She looked untouchable. The Fever looked unstoppable. The WNBA looked ready to take its next giant leap. But in the blink of an eye, it all came crashing down. And it wasn't just her body betraying her. From injuries to criticism to questionable officiating, Clark's second year became a storm of setbacks that left the entire league reeling. For years, Caitlin Clark carried a reputation as an iron woman. She barely missed a game in high school, she never sat out during her record-shattering college career, and even in her grueling rookie season, she powered through every contest like a machine built for basketball. The narrative around her was simple. She didn't break. But basketball has a way of testing even the strongest bodies. This season, after years of durability, Clark's streak snapped. The girl who had never flinched at fatigue or pain suddenly found herself sidelined again and again. The WNBA's brightest star had been dimmed not by her opponents, but by her own body. And as it turned out, that was only the beginning. Started small, almost insignificant. During training camp, Clark complained of tightness in her left quad. Nothing major, just soreness, the kind of thing every athlete plays through. But then came May 24th, a strained quad during a regular season game. She missed time, and suddenly whispers started. Was she really as indestructible as fans thought? Those whispers grew louder when, on June 26th, she picked up a left groin injury. She fought her way back only to strain the right groin on July 15th. Her body wasn't just bruised, it was breaking in multiple places. But the cruelest blow came during rehab. On August 7th, while trying to recover for a playoff push, Clark suffered a bone bruise in her ankle. That was the final straw. Her season was over after just 13 games. Each setback piled onto the last, like dominoes tumbling in slow motion. And with every missed game, the WNBA lost not just its most exciting player, but its biggest draw. Still, injuries weren't the only thing working against her. Caitlin Clark's rookie season wasn't just good, it was mythic. She didn't just step into the WNBA, she reshaped it. Every arena she touched was sold out, every broadcast set new ratings records, and every young fan wore her jersey like a badge of honor. She wasn't simply another rookie, she was an event. The Indiana Fever, a franchise long stuck in irrelevance, suddenly found itself on national TV nearly every week. The narrative was building. This team had the next face of the league, and her career was going to be the engine that powered a new era for women's basketball. That's why the off-season carried such electricity. The Fever weren't content with just making the playoffs. They brought in an experienced coach to stabilize the young roster, added veterans with championship pedigree, and drafted another promising top pick to build around Clark. The mission was clear. Not only would Caitlin dominate individually, but the team itself was being built to chase a title. Fever fans, long deprived of relevance, began to believe this was the dawn of something historic. But expectations are heavy, and they don't take injuries into account. Once Clark's body began to falter, all those carefully laid plans unraveled. The Fever weren't the same team without her. The spacing disappeared without her shooting. The pace slowed without her playmaking. And the hype that once filled every arena began to fade into whispers about whether this team had been prematurely crowned. What makes this chapter sting even more is the contrast. Clark's rookie season had been a fairy tale. Her sophomore year was supposed to be the sequel. The triumph that proved her dominance wasn't a fluke. Instead, the sequel turned into something closer to a tragedy. The very narrative that had lifted her into the spotlight now flipped on her, transforming from celebration into scrutiny. The fall from expectation to disappointment was sharp, sudden, and cruel. And as those expectations came crashing down, Clark wasn't just battling her body. She was battling the game itself. But the biggest blows didn't only come from her own body. They came from the way the game was played, and even more painfully, from the people meant to enforce it. Caitlin Clark's sophomore season quickly became a study in frustration. The numbers told one part of the story, a shooting percentage that hovered well below league average, including a ghastly 27.9% from three. For a player whose reputation was built on raining deep shots with effortless confidence, those misses felt magnified. Every brick echoed louder, every off night became ammunition for critics. And when she played on the road, it became downright brutal. Just 2-4-35 from deep in away arenas. For a player who had built her aura on silencing hostile crowds, suddenly she was fueling them. But statistics don't capture the whole picture. Anyone watching the games could see Clark's mounting frustration, not just with her own play, but with the officiating. She took hit after hit driving to the rim, but often no whistle followed. Contact that other stars seemed to draw fouls from went ignored when Clark was on the floor. Fans noticed it, commentators debated it, and Clark herself couldn't hide her exasperation. There were moments where she stared down refs after missed calls, threw her arms up in disbelief, and even muttered under her breath as cameras zoomed in. It created a dangerous cycle. The harder Clark pushed, the rougher the defense got, and the less she seemed to get the benefit of the doubt. Was it because she was young? Because referees resented the hype that surrounded her? Or simply because the league hadn't yet adjusted to protecting its brightest new star? Nobody knew the exact answer, but the outcome was the same. Clark often looked like she was battling not just 5 defenders, but the whistle as well. This lack of protection mattered. Basketball isn't just about talent. It's about rhythm and confidence. When players feel they're not getting fair calls, they play differently. Clark, known for her relentless drives and fearless shot-taking, began to hesitate. Her frustration seeped into her body language, and opposing defenses fed off it. What should have been her breakout sophomore dominance instead turned into a season where she seemed shackled, not just by injuries, but by the very structure of the game itself. The officiating debates spilled into social media, dividing fans into camps. Some argued Clark was being targeted because of her popularity. Others insisted she wasn't owed star treatment and needed to toughen up. Either way, the storylines kept shifting further away from basketball brilliance and deeper into controversy. And controversy is fuel for critics, and they came with sharpened knives. The same commentators who once hailed Clark as a generational talent began to flip their narratives. Suddenly, headlines weren't about her record-breaking scoring, but about her inefficiency. Analysts questioned her shot selection, her defense, even her ability to adapt to the professional game. The words overhyped and figured out started popping up more and more in articles and debates. Opponents, too, seemed to relish the chance to humble her. Veteran players muttered about how the league had adjusted to Clark's style, that she was no longer catching teams by surprise. When she struggled in high-profile matchups, those whispers became louder. Critics pointed to her percentages, her turnovers, her visible frustration with referees, and painted a picture not of a rising star, but of a player unraveling under pressure. For Clark, the criticism must have felt like an avalanche. 1 year earlier, she was celebrated as the savior of women's basketball. Now, she was the subject of hot takes questioning if her rookie year had been a fluke. The very media that had elevated her was now dissecting every flaw, every weakness, every missed shot. Fans split into camps. Some defended her, pointing to the injuries and the lack of officiating support. Others echoed the criticisms, insisting she had been given too much attention too soon. Social media became a war zone of highlight reels, low-light reels, and endless debates about whether Caitlin Clark was truly built for this stage. The more the noise grew, the harder it became to focus on the actual game. And for a player already carrying the burden of injuries and expectations, the constant criticism added yet another weight to an already crumbling foundation. But while critics argued and fans fought online, the league itself was feeling the cost of Clark's collapse in a far more tangible way. Because Caitlin Clark wasn't just a player, she was the WNBA's economic engine. And without her, the numbers told an even harsher story. Caitlin Clark wasn't just another rookie. She was a phenomenon, a once-in-a-generation figure who turned women's basketball into appointment viewing. During her first year, it wasn't just Indiana Fever fans tuning in. Everyone tuned in. Fathers who never watched the WNBA were suddenly glued to the screen with their daughters. Sports bars that once ignored women's basketball now had Fever games playing on their biggest TVs. Clark was more than a player. She was a cultural shift. Her effect was measurable. The WNBA's attendance soared to record levels. Merchandise sales exploded, with Clark's jersey selling out in hours. National broadcasts set ratings highs the league had never dreamed of. And the All-Star Game became one of the most watched women's sporting events in history. In every measurable way, Caitlin Clark wasn't just driving the Fever, she was driving the entire WNBA. That's why this sophomore slump hit so hard. The moment Clark's injuries piled up, the ripple effects were immediate. The All-Star Game, which had drawn 3.4 million viewers the year before, sank to just 2.2 million. That's still a healthy number, but the drop was staggering, proof of just how much Clark's presence mattered. Regular season games that once felt like major national events started to feel ordinary again. Arenas that had been selling out during her rookie campaign suddenly had empty rows of seats. For the league office, it was a nightmare. Clark was supposed to be the bridge to bigger TV contracts, global sponsorships, and long-term cultural relevance. Without her on the floor, that bridge felt fragile. The WNBA had banked its momentum on one player, and now it was forced to confront just how vulnerable that strategy was. For Clark herself, the weight of knowing that she wasn't just a player but an industry must have been overwhelming. Imagine being 23 years old, not only trying to recover from injuries, but also hearing the whispers that the league's survival depends on you. It's the kind of pressure that can either harden an athlete into steel or break them under its weight. And while the WNBA tried to weather the storm, Clark was left to deal with another storm: the personal toll of watching her season vanish. For all the statistics and headlines, it's easy to forget that Caitlin Clark is still human. Behind every disappointing shooting percentage, every missed game, every lost opportunity, there was a young woman who had spent her entire life climbing to this point. From high school gyms to packed college arenas to the WNBA spotlight, her story had always been one of triumph. Suddenly, the narrative was ripped away. When the announcement came that Clark's season was officially over, her statement was brief but telling: "Disappointed isn't a big enough word." Those words carried layers of pain. Disappointed in her body for breaking down. Disappointed for her teammates who counted on her. Disappointed for the fans who had shown up in record numbers just to see her play. Disappointed for a league that needed her as much as she needed it. That kind of disappointment isn't easy to shake. For an athlete, sitting on the sidelines while your teammates fight without you can feel worse than the injuries themselves. Clark had built her identity on being the one who never sat, the iron woman who always found a way to play through pain. Now she was forced to confront the reality that even she had limits. The mental toll went beyond just missing games. Every headline questioning her durability, every hot take labeling her overrated, every fan debating her place in the league chipped away at her. Athletes talk often about blocking out the noise, but when you're Caitlin Clark, the noise is everywhere. It's in the stadium, it's on TV, it's in every scroll of your phone. And then there was the officiating frustration, another psychological weight. Feeling like the referees weren't protecting her only added fuel to her sense of isolation. Instead of being celebrated as the league's rising star, she often felt like a target. That emotional burden doesn't heal as easily as a sprained muscle. Yet, even in the face of that disappointment, Clark showed grace. She praised her teammates for fighting without her. She thanked fans for their endless support. She kept her words measured, refusing to lash out even when the pressure must have felt unbearable. It was a glimpse into her resilience, and a hint that maybe, just maybe, this storm would only strengthen her for what's next. But while Clark tried to find closure, her team was left scrambling. Because without her, the Fever's playoff hopes were hanging by a thread. The Indiana Fever had entered the season with championship dreams. With Clark leading the charge, the playoffs weren't just a goal, they were an expectation. But as her injuries mounted, those dreams began to shrink. By the end of the year, the Fever found themselves barely above .500, sitting at 21-20. The only thing separating them from irrelevance was the thin margin of an 8th seed. The numbers told the story better than anything else. With Clark on the floor, the Fever were a strong 8-5. Without her, they stumbled to 13-15. The difference wasn't subtle. It was the kind of contrast that showed just how much one player mattered. Fans who had spent the off-season envisioning parades and banners were now just hoping to survive the first round. Even making the playoffs felt less like an achievement and more like clinging to a lifeline. The team's entire identity had been wrapped around Clark's shooting, her playmaking, her ability to draw defenses and create space. Without her, Everything collapsed inward. Other teams smelled blood. Instead of fearing the fever, they circled them like sharks. Every game was a reminder that Indiana without Clark was just another middle-of-the-pack team. And for the WNBA, this was disastrous. The league's biggest story had gone from, can Clark win a championship in year 2? To, can the Fever survive without her? But perhaps the cruelest part was timing. Clark had already proven in her rookie year that she could carry a team on her back. A sophomore leap might have cemented her as one of the most dominant young stars in basketball history. Instead, injuries and officiating frustrations left her sidelined, watching as her team fought desperately just to stay alive. It was supposed to be a coronation. Instead, it turned into a salvage operation. And as the Fever clung to that 8th seed, the broader narrative became impossible to ignore. Caitlin Clark's sophomore season wasn't just a personal disaster. It was a disaster for her team, and for the league itself. Caitlin Clark's second season will be remembered not for highlights, but for heartbreak. It began with a triple-double and the promise of superstardom. It ended with a string of injuries, endless criticism, poor officiating, and the sight of the league's brightest star sitting in street clothes. For Clark, it was a storm that tested everything. Her body, her confidence, her mental resilience. For the Fever, it was the collapse of a carefully built plan. For the WNBA, it was a reminder of just how fragile momentum can be when it depends on one player. But history isn't written in a single season. Every great athlete faces setbacks. What defines them isn't the stumble, but the response. Will Caitlin Clark come back stronger in 2026, using this year as fuel to rewrite the narrative? Or will her sophomore slump linger as a cautionary tale, proof that even the brightest stars can burn out too soon? The questions will hang in the air until she takes the court again. But one thing is undeniable. Women's basketball has never needed her more. The league, the fans, even her critics, all are waiting to see if the girl who once seemed unbreakable can rise again. So what do you think? Was this just one cruel year, a bump in the road toward greatness? Or did the sophomore storm expose cracks too deep to ignore?